They say communication is everything, but no one ever talks about the moment it dies. Not with a scream, not with a slammed door, but with a quiet shrug and a softer, "I'm fine." That's how it starts. Not with violence, but with retreat. Not with rage, but with withdrawal. One day, he stops talking. And not because he has nothing to say, but because saying it feels like losing. Terry Rio calls this relational withdrawal. Others call it stonewalling, shutdown, passive silence. But for the man inside it, it doesn't feel like strategy. It feels like survival. Like the only way to stay in the relationship is to disappear from it. At first, he tried. He really did. He showed up, he listened, he even said what hurt. But every sentence felt like stepping into a minefield. Not because she was cruel, she was expressive, emotional, committed to connection, but to him it felt like drowning in words. Conversations weren't conversations. They were interrogations dressed in intimacy. He didn't feel met, he felt cornered. And so over time, he learned the subtle art of quiet. Not the Zen kind, but the defeated kind. The kind where you rehearse every response in your head and still choose silence. Because silence, at least, doesn't get twisted. It doesn't get misunderstood. It doesn't come back to haunt you in the next fight when your own words are used as evidence against your character. So you stop talking. Not to hurt, not to win, but to preserve the little dignity you still feel inside your own head. But let's go deeper. Terry Real doesn't just ask what's happening, he asks what happened before it started happening. Because most men weren't taught how to be relational. They were taught how to be useful, productive, independent, competent. That's how you survive as a boy in a world allergic to male vulnerability. You learn quickly, talking about your feelings is soft. Needing someone is weakness. Disagreement means threat. So when conflict enters a relationship, men don't lean in. They scan for exits. They look for escape routes, not out of cowardice, but out of conditioning. This is the part no one sees, how silence isn't just silence. It's the sum total of 1,000 unspoken messages from childhood. Don't cry, man up, fix it or shut up. And now here he is, an adult in love, being asked to share his heart like it's as easy as passing the salt. But he can't, or won't, because in his world, talking doesn't equal connection. It equals exposure, and exposure equals shame. So he does the only thing that makes sense. He shuts down. He closes shop. He nods and smiles and makes jokes at dinner. He might even have sex, but something inside is curled up in the corner, quiet and protective. Not angry, not vengeful, just done. And that's the scariest kind of silence. The silence of a man who no longer believes words will save him. A man who's been made to feel incompetent at the one thing that matters most, emotional presence. Most women don't know what this silence really is. They think it's neglect, ego, power. But Terry Real sees it clearly. It's pain. Not always obvious pain, but the quiet ache of someone who feels ill-equipped to love the way they're being asked to love. The man isn't withholding to punish, he's withholding because he doesn't know if anything he says will be good enough. He's tired of being misunderstood, tired of being told that everything he feels is wrong, tired of fighting for a version of himself he's not even sure is lovable. So he trades honesty for peace, presence for compliance, intimacy for function. And from the outside, he looks fine, calm, stoic, even stable. But inside, there's a man who wants to be heard, wants to be seen, wants to connect, but not at the cost of his masculinity. And therein lies the paradox. Because the modern relationship demands what traditional masculinity forbids: vulnerability, emotional agility, openness. And so the man is split in two. One half trying to become what love asks of him, the other half terrified that doing so will make him lose his sense of self. And in that fracture, the voice disappears. Not just from conversations, but from the relationship itself. He's still there, physically, but his soul is somewhere else. Somewhere safer. Somewhere he doesn't have to translate his pain into a language that feels foreign. And she feels it. That absence, that withdrawal. She tries to reach him, tries to bring him back with warmth or confrontation or tears, but every attempt lands like pressure, not comfort. Because she wants transparency, and he's still working on permission. Permission to feel without being blamed, permission to speak without being corrected, permission to need without being seen as weak. And until that permission is granted, he will stay silent.
not because he has nothing to say, but because he's still waiting to believe he'll be heard without being diminished. That's not stonewalling. That's a cry no one knows how to translate.
What no one tells you is that silence, in men, is often grief in disguise. Not the loud, cinematic kind of grief, the funeral and eulogy kind, but the internal erosion of a man who no longer recognizes his place in the home he helped build. He grieves not because he stopped loving, but because somewhere along the way, love stopped feeling like home and started feeling like surveillance. Every word measured, every tone dissected, every mistake remembered. So he adapts. He learns to avoid the triggers. He rehearses the safe answers. Nothing's wrong. I'm just tired. Let's not fight. And she hears this as avoidance. But to him, it's diplomacy. The daily act of protecting the fragile peace between two people who used to talk without armor. Terry Real would tell you this isn't about emotional laziness, it's about emotional survival. When a man is shamed for how he speaks, he doesn't become better, he becomes quiet. He doesn't evolve, he vanishes. This is what relational trauma looks like, not the catastrophic kind, but the slow drip corrosion of confidence. Every time he speaks and gets interrupted, corrected, psychoanalyzed, or dismissed, he registers a message. I'm not safe here. Not physically, but emotionally. And no man thrives in a space where he's always on trial. That's what people miss when they say he just needs to open up. As if vulnerability is a faucet he forgot to turn on. As if he's hiding something for fun. No, what he's hiding is himself. Because the last time he brought himself fully, he was met with critique, not comfort. With analysis, not acceptance. And so he made a quiet vow, I won't bring that part of me again. Not because he's manipulative, not because he wants control, but because pain, once repeated, teaches the brain to build walls where doors used to be. And here's where it gets darker. Silence, left untreated, becomes identity. At some point, the man stops trying to talk. He stops reaching. He begins to believe that who he is, fundamentally, is someone who is misunderstood. That emotional distance is not a phase, it's a feature. He adapts to disconnection as a lifestyle. And from the outside, he seems fine. He works. He shows up. He makes jokes at parties. But the intimacy is gone. What was once a partnership has become a performance. He nods, he agrees, he provides, but he does not speak. Not really. Not about what he fears, what he dreams, what he resents. And when asked why, the answer doesn't come in words. It comes in patterns. In low-grade apathy. In the subtle ways he checks out. Late nights on his phone, small talk in place of affection. A gentle but irreversible retreat into solitude. But solitude, as Terry Real explains, is not neutrality. It's protest. A protest against feeling constantly wrong, constantly broken. A protest against the emotional labor required to decode someone else's feelings while yours are met with suspicion. He retreats not because he wants to be alone, but because he wants to stop feeling like the enemy in his own house. The truth is, most men don't leave relationships by walking out the door. They leave by going silent. And when their silence is misunderstood as coldness, as detachment, as immaturity, it only deepens the wound. Because they're not just quiet, they're unseen. And what happens next is tragic. The woman, feeling the loss of connection, ramps up her pursuit. She pushes harder for intimacy. She asks more questions. She wants deeper answers. And from her view, this is love. It's effort. But from his side, it's pressure. It's interrogation. It's an implicit message, you're not doing enough. And so he doubles down on silence. Because every attempt to engage feels like an invitation to fail.
Not because he doesn't care, but because caring is exhausting when it's always measured against a moving target. So now you have two people in a room full of words neither can speak. She wants him to open, he wants to not be dissected. She wants more emotion, he wants less punishment for feeling the wrong ones. And both believe they're doing the work. Both believe they're loving as best they can. But the relationship is dying in the space between what is said and what is understood. And the tragedy is not just that men stop talking, it's that no one ever taught them how to speak in the first place. Not with shame, not with the fear of being diminished. This is the emotional inheritance most men are carrying. Not just silence, but learned muteness. A generational echo that says, don't feel too much, don't need too much, and for God's sakes, don't ever let them see what's really inside. Because if you do, you'll be labeled weak. Or worse, unlovable. And so they hide. Behind jokes, behind work, behind distance, and we call it masculine reserve. But it's not reserve, it's retreat. It's the final form of a boy who learned early on that the world doesn't know what to do with a sensitive man. That his feelings will either be weaponized or dismissed, and the woman who loves him may not mean to hurt him, but she speaks a language he never learned. She wants vulnerability, but he was trained for stoicism. She wants transparency, but he was trained for survival. And until that translation gap is bridged, not just by effort, but by understanding, the silence will remain, not as absence, but as a shield.
But what if silence isn't the end? What if it's the last flicker of a man trying to hold on to something sacred, even if he doesn't yet have the words to explain it? Terry Real teaches that men don't shut down because they feel nothing. They shut down because they feel too much. But they've been taught since boyhood that their inner world is a liability. That vulnerability makes them weak. That emotional needs are feminine and feminine is lesser. And so they split themselves in two. The part they show to the world and the part they bury so deep they forget how to access it. This isn't dysfunction, it's conditioning. And it's everywhere. In locker room sarcasm, in the father who only teaches discipline, never affection, in the partners who say talk to me but flinch when the floodgates open. So the man learns, intimacy equals danger, expression equals risk, and love becomes performance. He listens, he supports, he provides, he protects, but he doesn't speak, not truly. Because every time he's dared to reveal his inner world, he's been met with confusion, dismissal, or worse, a subtle recoiling as if his depth is too much to hold. And this is where the silent war begins, not between him and his partner, but within himself. He begins to ask quietly, is there something wrong with me? Not because she says it, but because the tone, the size, the unmet expectations whisper it daily. He becomes fluent in emotional subtext. He hears every "we need to talk" as a prelude to punishment. He anticipates criticism before it's spoken. He overcorrects. He walks on eggshells. He trades honesty for peace. And in doing so, he disappears. Not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. This is the modern man's quietest tragedy. He stops talking not because he has nothing to say, but because saying it never made anything better. He begins to believe that his silence is the only thing holding the relationship together, that his truth would shatter it, that his needs are inconvenient. So he stops needing, or at least pretends to, and the silence hardens, first into habit, then into identity. But Real doesn't leave us here. He offers a path back, not through grand gestures or emotional exposés, but through one deceptively simple act, truth-telling. Raw, imperfect, fumbling truth-telling. Not the polished language of therapy, not the articulate sensitivity of Instagram wisdom, just honesty. I don't know how to say this. I feel shut down when I try to speak. I'm scared you'll hear this the wrong way.
These are the first bricks in the bridge back to intimacy, not because they fix everything, but because they begin everything. And here's the secret. Most men are dying to speak, not in volume, but in truth. They want to be known, fully, without needing to perform masculinity or emotional labor. But they're waiting for safety, for permission, for someone to hear them without trying to fix them, because they've been fixed all their lives. School fixed their energy, sports fixed their vulnerability, work fixed their ambition, relationships tried to fix their communication. And at some point, the man looks at all the fixing and wonders, was anything about me ever okay to begin with? So what does it take to get a man talking again? Not pressure, not interrogation, not emotional spreadsheets of unmet needs. It takes space. It takes patience. It takes the kind of listening that doesn't immediately react, that holds discomfort without judgment, that welcomes silence as part of the language. It takes a woman willing to hear what's actually being said beneath the words. I want to connect, but I don't know how to do it without failing you. Because that's what men fear more than vulnerability. They fear failing the woman they love. And they would rather be silent than be wrong. They would rather retreat than feel like a disappointment in their own home. But here's the paradox. Every time he chooses silence over truth, he becomes the very thing he's trying to avoid, a stranger, to her, to himself, to the relationship. And over time, that silence stops being self-protection and starts becoming self-erasure. A man who stops speaking stops growing. And a relationship that loses truth loses its soul. So if you're a man listening to this and you recognize the silence in your own chest, hear this. Your voice still matters. Even if it shakes, even if it offends, even if it's messy and half-formed, you are not weak for needing space to speak. You're not broken for wanting to be understood. You don't need to have the perfect words. You just need to start where you are, with what you do know, with what you can say. And if the person beside you can't hold that space, that's not a reason to shrink further. That's a reason to ask harder questions about what intimacy really means in your life. And if you're someone who loves a man who's gone quiet, listen with more than your ears. Listen with patience. Listen without fixing. Ask not just, why won't he talk, but what made him stop? The answers won't come all at once, but they will, in fragments, in attempts, in long pauses, and whispered truths. And if you're willing to meet those fragments with grace, you might just hear something you've never heard before. Not because he's never said it, but because it's taken him a lifetime to believe he could. Because silence is not emptiness. It is the echo of everything a man has left to say.